Welcome back to the Legendary Nights podcast. This is season 4, episode number 7, the tale of Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez. A tale of a fight which had the magnitude of one of the greatest fights on paper, but turned out in the end to be one of the most anticlimactic moments in the course of boxing history. But it is a legendary moment in the sport, and the tale of these two fighters in particular is legendary because they are legendary fighters, and we are going to cover their tale, and we are going to talk about their beginnings, how they entered into this sport at certain points, and certain moments that are significant in the lead up to this particular fight between the two of them, Johnston.
Yes, it was a huge fight, wasn't it? A massive fight. Two of the pound-for-pound best, arguably at their peaks, I would say, as well, which is something you don't get very often. We've had a few this year, but in terms of at their actual peaks of the professional sport, I think this is up there. This is up there with the very best of them, to be honest with you. And yeah, as you say, I mean, there's so much hoo-ha about this fight in terms of what happens after it, I should say, and in it as well. But yeah, two of the pound-for-pound best coming head-to-head for a massive fight in 1993 in San Antonio, Texas. And yeah, I can't wait to get our teeth into this and build up there to that very moment, that supposed to be great fight that ends up in a lot of controversy.
So we're going to begin this tale in 1987, but before we start 1987, we would like to briefly run through the careers of both fighters and explain how they got to that point. And we're going to start with Pernell Whitaker, who, of course, is one of the greatest defensive fighters of his time, or any time for that matter. His southpaw style enabled him to be incredibly elusive, and his impeccable footwork made him difficult to hit. Some described his style as a form of fistic breakdancing. Unlike his opponent for this tale, Pernell had a brilliant amateur career, and due to his extraordinary talent, he was named as the US boxing team captain, and he was the leader of one of the greatest Olympic teams the country had ever produced, which included Meldrick Taylor, Mark Breland, Frank Tate, Evander Holyfield, and Virgil Hill. But interestingly, Pernell almost didn't make the 1984 Olympic team, and his future professional trainer, Lou Duver, explains why. He said, Pernell Whitaker was the 132-pound world champion heading in to the US Olympic box office in Las Vegas on July 5, 1984. Not only was he favoured to win the box office and make the team, but he was sure to win the gold. That's how good he was. But with all the hype, everything changed with a loss to Joe Bellink. Now, Pernell had beaten Bellink convincingly with a 4-1 decision when they first faced off at the Olympic trials in Fort Worth, Texas a month before. Maybe he thought he was going to run through Bellink at the box office, but instead, Bellink fought with an aggressive style and dominated Pernell on the judges' scorecards in that first match at the box office, winning 5-0. Pernell took that loss hard, and he was ready to pack his bags and head home to Norfolk, Virginia. Lucky, I was able to convince him to stay.
Lou Duver continued. He said, at this stage of the box office, a boxer would have to lose twice in order to get knocked out of going to the games. So Bellink would have to beat Pernell again in order to knock him off the team. After getting some tapes from ABC, we studied him. We studied some of the mistakes he had made to improve his form. I really believe he would have left and had no part of the Olympic team had I not convinced him otherwise. It would have been one of the biggest mistakes of his life. After the fight, we went to the ballroom at the hotel, moved the chairs aside, and I showed him how to beat Bellink. 2 days later, Pernell did just that, beating Bellink on a 3-2 decision. Not only did he make the Olympic squad, but he was named the team captain. That showed me a lot about Pernell. He was a hard worker and was willing to listen to any advice you gave him if he thought it would help him win. Plus, he was a quick study. He picked things up and applied them as easily as most people breathe. Pernell Whitaker went on to take a gold medal in the lightweight category and was credited with an amateur record of 201 wins, 91 by way of knockout, and only 14 defeats, but he claims that he fought over 500 contests. It was also reported by one of Whitaker's Olympic team members that someone took his piss samples after every fight, because Pernell, sadly, had a drug addiction that early in his career. Although this would plague Pernell's whole boxing career, his performances in the ring never dipped until later in life. Lou Duva believed that Pernell began his drug abuse later rather than early in his career, but he did confirm that it was true.
Lou said, "If there was one boxer who fell prey to the lures of drugs and alcohol, it was Pernell Whitaker. I never saw Pernell take a drink until he got started on drugs. I can't say when he started, but I think it was toward the end of his career." Now, we have explained how Pernell got his nickname on our Career Profiles episode, but let's explain it again for the purposes of those that haven't heard that. Now, Pernell's parents actually nicknamed him Pete after one of his uncles, and he was addressed as Pete by his friends and family. When he began to emerge as a top amateur, his hometown fans in Norfolk used to chant "Sweet Pete," but this was actually misinterpreted by a local sports writer as Sweet Pea, and that name, Sweet Pea, stuck ever since. So following his Olympic success, Sweet Pea turned professional and signed along with 4 members of the 1984 US Olympic team, which included Mark Breland, Meldrick Taylor, Tyrell Biggs and Evander Holyfield, with the Duva family, who were now a new promotional company at the time called Main Events. Whitaker made his debut on November 15, 1984, in front of 19,000 fans alongside that class of 84 on a card appropriately labelled Night of Gold. Admission into Madison Square Garden was free, with the ABC television cameras shining on Whitaker, who beat up the undefeated Farian Comu and earned an incredible $75,000 in his pro debut. From then on, Pernell maintained his unblemished record and was 11-0 by the end of 1986. Which now leads us nicely on to Whitaker's legendary night's rival, the legendary Mexican champion, Julio Cesar Chavez. His nickname, JC, might give you some hint of his revered status as a god in Mexico. Chavez epitomized the Mexican style of boxing. He was patient but ruthless when stalking his opponents and closing the ring off. A pressure fighter with a cast-iron chin who loved to attack the body, so much so that he was known for his thunderous body shots.
Yes, Chavez was a very clever fighter who could shift his attack to the head and land that trademark right hand. Many know him as the César of boxing, or El Gran Champion Mexicano, the great Mexican champion in English. But his original nickname was Chatito, or Chato, created by his mother, Isabel Gonzalez. He says he didn't become a boxer to become famous. It was a necessity. He said, "I saw my mum working, ironing, washing people's clothes, and I promised her I would give her a house someday and she would never have to do that job again." Now, unlike Pernell, Chavez turned professional following a short 13-bout amateur career, making his debut at the age of 17 in Sinaloa, Mexico, on February 5th, 1980. He recorded a 6th-round knockout against Andres Felix, who 13 years later would be cross-eyed and standing outside of Julio's house, hoping for a handout after falling on hard times. Where Felix would go on to do nothing in the sport, Chavez was destined for greatness. He told Boxing News, through a translator, Carlos Pina, that after I told my mother that I wanted to box, I promised her that when I get my first loss, I will retire from it. Then he paused for both dramatic and comedic effect. After a few fights, you can imagine that I realised how good I was. He spent the best part of 2 years fighting on the Mexican circuit, competing from bantamweight to super featherweight. He was something of an unknown quantity outside of Mexico. That was until he made his American debut on the undercard of a Bobby Chacon Rafael Limon fight, their 4th fight on December 1982. He defeated Jerry Lewis at the Memorial Auditorium in Sacramento by disqualification to go an incredible 34-0 with 33 knockouts, and that was, of course, on a Don King promotion. Chavez revealed that in his first fight, he actually earned 250 pesos, which was $12, or the equivalent of. But he would go on to earn millions of dollars in his 25-year career.
Over the next year, Chavez continued to fight mostly in Mexico, but he also made an appearance in Puerto Rico and Los Angeles, acquiring a professional record of 43 wins, 37 by way of knockout, and no losses. It's fair to say that although his record looked outstanding on paper, he had not faced anyone significant. However, as we always say on this show, the Mexican circuit is one of the toughest in boxing, so of course he still deserves a lot of credit for coming out of it with an undefeated record. That record was brought into disrepute on March the 4th, 1981, against Miguel Ruiz in Culiacan, Mexico. Bert Blewett of A to Z of World explains, "For many years, all the leading record books, including both Pugilito and the Ring Record Book, recorded the first loss of Julio Cesar Chavez as being by disqualification. In the first round, Chavez landed a knockout blow as the bell sounded, and he was disqualified on the night of the fight, with Ruiz declared the winner. But, as Bert Blewett reports, this, as in the result, has since been changed to a knockout victory for Chavez, based on confirmation from the local boxing commission in Culiacan that it altered the verdict the following day." Interestingly, Chavez's manager, Ramon Felix, happened to be a member of the Culiacan Commission Board, leading many to believe that his involvement during the review would have impacted on their decision, as this was a clear conflict of interest. Chavez went on to capture his first world title on September the 13th, 1984, when he knocked out the betting favourite Mario Martinez for the vacant WBC Super Featherweight Championship. The Mexican legend then went on to defend the title 7 times, defeating some greats of the sport, which included the brilliant Ruben Castillo, Roger Mayweather. In attendance in that night was actually Mr. T and Muhammad Ali, funnily enough. He also beat Rocky Lockridge and Juan Laporte.
The Puerto Ricans' beating was so bad that Bobby Goodman, the matchmaker at Madison Square Garden at the time, said, "Laporte told me he couldn't make love for weeks after they fought." That win took Chavez's record to 54-0 with 58 knockouts, and he was now being mentioned at this point as one of, if not, in some quarters, the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to his Mexican faithful, and just like Pernell Whitaker, Chavez would also battle with drugs and alcohol, but we will come to this later on in the episode. Now, he explained that at the start of his career, "I never drank. I was a great athlete. I took care of myself. Before each fight, I would concentrate and prepare in the mountains for a minimum of 2 months." Well, when it came to preparing for fights, Chavez had a different approach. He wouldn't pummel the heavy bag or the speed bag. He would literally spar 10 rounds a day for 6 days a week and run miles. That was how he trained. So moving over to Pernell, and on March 28, 1987, Whitaker had his first acid test that came in the form of Roger Mayweather at the Norfolk Scope, Virginia, for the vacant NABF lightweight title. There was a bit of needle between the two after Whitaker actually punched Roger in the chest during their medical, and Lou Duver explained what happened. So Roger Mayweather squared off against Pernell Whitaker in 1987. Mayweather always had a mouth on him, and he got into a shouting match with Pernell at the press conference, which soon turned into a shoving match. He was hot under the collar because we reminded him of what happened against Lockridge. Now, Lockridge had knocked out Mayweather in 1 round and was also guided by Duver, the Duvers. And Duver continued, he said, "They wouldn't even let Pernell and Mayweather weigh in together. That's how heated things were." Mayweather was actually knocked down by a left in the very first round in what ended up being a terrific scrap.
Whitaker was put down by a right hand in the 9th, but there was more to this round, as explained once again by Lou Duval when he said, "During the 9th round, Mayweather's drawstring on his trunks came undone and they began to fall. Pernell, clowning around as usual, pulled his trunks all the way down during the fight and exposed his backside to the world. Pernell also exposed him in the fight, winning almost every round on the way to a big decision. Pernell, at this point, could do almost anything in the ring, as he demonstrated in the Mayweather fight, and could beat any style that was put in front of him. He was a defensive wizard, but some complained that he wasn't the easiest fighter to watch. He would get criticised because his fights lacked the toe-to-toe action. But his trainer, George Benton, would tell him to just win this time and look good the next time. Now, after a routine warm-up victory in Houston, Texas, Pernell headed back to the Norfolk Scope Arena to defend the NABF lightweight title and take on Puerto Rican Miguel Santana on July 25, 1987. The vacant USBA lightweight championship was also on the line, and Whitaker produced a fan-friendly performance this time, putting down Santana twice in round 2 and then proceeded to give him a one-sided beating. Eventually, the referee had seen enough and put a stop to the annihilation in the 6th round. Now, shortly after the Juan Laporte fight, Julio Cesar Chavez met a Culiacan high school track coach named Daniel Castro. Ever since, in addition to his sparring and 3 to 6 mile warning runs, Chavez began timed interval workouts on a track, perhaps 10 100-metre sprints, 5 400s, 5 800s or 5 1000s a day. 6 weeks before each major fight, he would head into the mountains outside Mexico City and run at altitude. Sometimes he would run 2 or 3 miles on the morning of a fight.
Chavez, who was in excellent physical condition at 25 years of age, made his last defence of the WBC super featherweight title with a knockout win over Danilo Cabrera on August 21st, 1987. The Mexican had made a 9th successive defence of his title over the course of 3 years. Next up for Chavez was the WBA lightweight champion Edwin Rosario on November the 21st, 1987 at the Las Vegas Hilton Outdoor Arena. Chavez commented before the fight, "Everything I've accomplished as champion and the 9 title defences would be thrown away with a loss to Rosario." The two fighters nearly exchanged blows during the press conference after Rosario threatened to send Chavez back to Mexico in a coffin. This pissed Chavez off, who produced a career best performance by breaking down Rosario with body shots that left the former champion breathless and forcing referee Richard Steele to stop the fight. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't seen, if you want to see the best of Chavez, go and have a look at this fight. It's tremendous. KO Magazine actually glorified his 11th round stoppage. It said for one night at least, he, as in Chavez, grasped perfection, clutched it to his chest, and then held it high above his head for all historians to see. The Ring wrote, "A description of the fight reads like a police account of a street beating." Chavez credits this fight as his finest performance as well himself, saying that I had a lot of great fights where at the end of the night I made it look easy, but this fight shot me to another level. Chavez admitted that he had his first alcoholic drink after this victory over Edwin Rosario to celebrate, and he recalled, "It was my biggest mistake. It wouldn't just be the alcohol abuse that he would suffer from this point until the back end of his career." He recalled, "If I didn't drink so much and use cocaine, the end of my career would have definitely been different." Well, after the bout, Sports Illustrated ran a headline, "Time to howl Cesar. WBA lightweight champion Cesar Chavez of Mexico, maybe the world's best fighter."
It was this victory that not only gained him more recognition to the wider audience, but it also enhanced his credibility in Mexico. Ramiro Gonzalez of the LA Opinion said Chavez was something different, something extra natural. He always fought for the Mexican flag. People didn't care. They would walk through war just to see him fight. He maintained his dominance in Mexico with a knockout win over another national treasure and former sparring partner, Rafael Lemon, on June the 4th, 1988. Please do go and check out our Legendary Nights episode on the tale of Chacon versus Lemon for more details on another Mexican hero. He spoke of this fight and his sparring sessions with Chavez, and he said, "I met him a long time before we fought. We were sparring partners for a long time. He was young when he lived in Culiacan. When I faced Chavez, I was retired. It was because of the change of opponent. The other opponent got hurt, so I stepped in. Chavez had a really hard chin. He resisted all the punches. Neither of us would retreat in the sparring sessions. We only sparred 3 rounds because they were wars." Limon then credited Chavez as the best Mexican fighter ever, past, present, and future. Now, 4 months earlier, Pernell Whitaker took Jose Luis Ramirez at the Stade de l'Ivoire in France for the WBC lightweight title in only his 16th professional fight on March the 12th, 1988. This fight would become one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history. Ramirez was an excellent fighter, with 5 of his 6 losses coming against world-class opposition in the likes of Ruben Olivares, Alexis Arguello, Ray Mancini, Edwin Rosario, and Hector Macho Camacho, before both fighters even stepped into the ring to face each other. The controversy was rife after allegations of indecency being thrown in the direction of the WBC by the Whitaker camp.
In their view, as in Pernell's camp's view, the WBC had favoured a bout between Ramirez and the WBA champion Julio Cesar Chavez. But because Whitaker got the jump on Chavez, his team felt they were entering the fight at a disadvantage. Jose Sulaiman was actually rumoured to be interested in the unification fight between fellow Mexicans Ramirez and Chavez following his win over Rosario, which moved him up in the ranking to number 1 with the WBC. Now, this was an unusual move because the WBC had traditionally refused to rate champions of the WBA or IBF. WBO was irrelevant. Obviously, WBA is what Chavez held. Now, WBC ratings chairman Dickie Cole said, to be honest, the rating was at the request of Sulaiman. The conclusion I'm drawing is that it was to give Chavez a mandatory fight. Now, we did go through this in Pernell Whitaker's career profile, but we do need to run through some of this again for the purposes of this tale. So, Chavez's promoter, Don King, got the unification fight with Ramirez agreed, which actually meant that the Whitaker fight would be cancelled. However, ABC Sports had already purchased Ramirez against Whitaker for their network, forcing the director of programming, David Downs, to stand his ground. And he said, when King made Chavez Ramirez, that's when we protested. Sulaiman came out and said, I won't sanction Ramirez Whitaker. We told him, you already have. It concerned us that Sulaiman would go back on his original sanction and try to undo the fight that was already made. We told him he had royally screwed ABC. He then agreed and backed off. And Shelley Finkel, the New York-based rock music promoter who became a co-manager for main events, said WBC executive Piero Pini approached Whitaker at the weigh-in for the Ramirez fight. And he shoved a paper in front of Whitaker's nose and told him to sign for a Chavez fight just in case he won. Ramirez had already signed one. We wouldn't do it. After that incident, we had a fear of what would happen.
Whitaker was at his brilliant best that night, even with the broken left hand that he had sustained earlier in the fight. He showed off his magic disappearing acts throughout the fight and was a clear winner, in our opinion, and many others. The fight was a one-sided affair, with Whitaker winning no less than 9 rounds on most cards and deserved an easy, unanimous decision and the title. However, only one judge favoured Whitaker, 117-113, while the other 2 actually found a way to give Ramirez a split decision by scores of 118-113 and 116-115. It was a blatant cheat, and there's no other way we can describe it other than Pernell Whitaker was robbed. In his 1999 edition of the World Encyclopedia of Boxing, Harry Mullen, an Irish boxing writer and journalist, stated that the decision was generally considered to be a disgrace. Now, after watching this fight closely, and please do go back and watch this fight, You can't argue with those summaries. It really is one of the worst decisions in boxing history. Only one thing springs to mind with decisions like this, and many felt the same. Lou Duva actually called Jose Sulaiman a thief, and Shelley Finkel said King and Sulaiman fixed the fight, no question about it. In information sourced from the New York Times, Jose Sulaiman countered their allegations and actually filed a $1 million slander and libel lawsuit against Duva and Finkel. But the suit was dropped after Lou admitted that he had no direct evidence that the WBC fixed the fight. Dodgy's decision, of course, fixed fight or not, it was still recorded as a defeat for Pernell Whitaker, and it brought Sweet Pea's professional career record to 15-1. But he wouldn't have to wait long for another crack at a world title again. 8 months later, Don King and Sulaiman got their desired fight when Chavez faced the WBC lightweight champion Jose Luis Ramirez in a unification bout in Las Vegas.
The New York Times actually reported on this fight between Chavez and Ramirez. It says, now, while Chavez never scored a knockdown, he buckled Ramirez's knees in the 4th round with a right hand that sent Ramirez reeling backwards in a half squat that nearly put him on the canvas. But Ramirez righted himself and gamely fought back as he did all night. The New York Times continued with their report stating that in somewhat irony, that Chavez's hand speed was superior to that of the 29-year-old Ramirez, who entered the bout as the WBC lightweight champion and left as the victim of somewhat controversial ending. As Ramirez moved forward in the 11th round of the scheduled 12-round bout, he and Chavez butted heads. Blood spilled from a gash on Ramirez's scalp, close to the middle of his forehead. The referee, Richard Steele, temporarily halted the bout so that the ringside physician, Flip Homansky, could examine the cut. Homansky took a look and would not let Ramirez continue. Now, by the rules, Steele was obliged to penalise Chavez as the uninjured fighter a point in the scoring, and the bout went to the judges, scoring for the first 10 rounds for the verdict. Even with Steele's deduction, all 3 judges had Chavez ahead. After, there was the reflex protest from Ramirez that the butt was intentional and that he figured he was winning the fight anyway, so that's why he done it. That's what they were saying. Just as predictable was Chavez's verbal counterpunch. Chavez actually said this of Ramirez: when he comes in, he lowers his head too much, hence why he smashed his head. So he got the verdict on controversial circumstances, which is quite ironic after what Ramirez had got an absolute robbery against Whitaker. So, moving on to Pernell Whitaker, and after 8 months out of the ring, Pernell returned with a comprehensive 4th round stoppage of Antonio Carter in Virginia before taking a second crack at a world title, this time the IBF version, which was currently being held by fellow American Greg Haugen. So on February 18, 1989, at the Hampton Coliseum in Virginia, Whitaker produced another one of his classiest performances, which was described by Sports Illustrated.
And it reads, he, as in Whitaker, came out flat-footed and stayed that way, right in Hagen's face. He used jarring, double and triple jabs to turn Hagen to confuse him. Then he ripped into Hagen's body, digging in hooks from both sides. With Whitaker in command, each round seemed a rerun of the last and a preview of the one to follow. The pattern was only broken in the 6th when Hagen threw a right hand, which Whitaker took on his right shoulder. Then Whitaker, a southpaw, fired a straight left hand to Hagen's head. It caught the champion flush, and as he started to fall forward, his rear foot was snagged by Whitaker's leg. Hagen fell to his knees. Rising quickly from the first knockdown of his career, he shook his head in disgust as he listened to the referee, Al Rothenberg, count off the mandatory 8. Hagen later said he had tripped. Whitaker won every round, although one judge, Paul Gibbs of Washington, scored it only 118-109. Jim Traylor of Virginia and Mike Liena of Illinois gave Whitaker a shutout decision of 120-107. Now moving over to Chavez, and on May the 13th, 1989, it was the turn of Julio Cesar Chavez, who went in search of his third world title in a third weight class. The current holder was a former rival and mutual opponent of Pernell Whitaker in Roger Mayweather, the WBC junior welterweight champion. The second act took place at the Forum in Inglewood, California, and the manner in which it unfolded was in stark contrast to their first encounter. This time, Mayweather was determined to keep his distance from the outset, throwing jabs and using his quick feet to prevent Chavez from setting himself. Mayweather made it a closer fight than the first, but maybe the pace he set himself tired him out as he began to tie Chavez up whenever he got close. This brought a chorus of boos from the pro-Chavez crowd.
However, during the end of round 6, Chavez took control and began to bully Mayweather, who still at times made it difficult. In the 10th round, Mayweather was still moving away from Chavez, trying to box like he had done in the earlier rounds, and having some success, which made the ending of the fight a little bit of a shock. So after the 10th, Mayweather told his corner that he had had enough. He could not continue. He was physically and mentally exhausted to the point that he had nothing left, and later complained of suffering with stomach cramps. Chavez showboated to the crowd in his post-fight celebration as he stood on the ring apron and gestured to his corners, obviously saying he's got more bollocks, showing he not only had the bollocks to beat up Mayweather, but he also had the balls to be a freeweight world champion and maintain his unbeaten record now of 62-0. So Pernell Whitaker made one successful defence of his IBF title before making his second on August the 20th, 1989 in a unification fight. The vacant WBC title was also up for grabs, and it was against Jose Luis Ramirez, and it was 1.5 years after being robbed, and this time it was at the Norfolk Scope Arena and away from France, which may have helped him. So this was the detailed blueprint from George Benton that Whitaker applied with pinpoint accuracy. I don't want you running all over the ring from this guy. Just walk and slip. Be a ring general. Don't be cute and try and knock him out. Don't load up, stick and slide, use the jab, and when you see a chance for a big shot, throw it. If you see something you don't like, walk away. Everything began with that right jab, delivered hard and accurately. Whitaker said, "I could have tied my left hand behind my back. The jab did everything." And then Pat Putman wrote on the fight for Sports Illustrated, and this is what he wrote.
Off the jab came an endlessly varied series of sharp combinations, a double hook, 2 left hands and a hook, a blurring burst of 5 machine gun punches. Midway through the 8th round, Whitaker hit Ramirez on the chin with a hook straight left combination that was almost too fast for the eye to follow. Yet seemingly unfazed, Ramirez shook his head and shuffled forward slowly. In Whitaker's corner, in the middle rounds, Lou Duva and George Benton worried that their fighter would become frustrated. He was throwing his best stuff, yet Ramirez was unmarked and seemed unhurt, though his charges had been slowed. "Forget about a knockout," they chorused to Whitaker. "He's got an iron chin. What you are doing is better than a knockout. You're beautiful. Keep the same tempo. Don't change the tempo." Only in the last round, the 12th, did Whitaker change his approach. "There's a performer buried deep inside his fighter's body. I knew I had the fight won," he said of his 19th victory in 20 professional fights. "And I am an entertainer. I knew the fans would like to see a little show." Now, before he went out for the final round, Duva told him, "Don't take any chances with this guy. Keep moving and keep working that jab. Remember, no crazy chances." Whitaker laughed and planted a kiss on the grizzled Duva's cheek. "Don't worry, baby," he said. "Don't worry." Duva immediately began to worry. "Cut that crap out," he screamed a moment later, his right fist slamming into the ring apron as Whitaker began his 12th round performance. In the ring, Whitaker had taken a flat-footed stance in front of Ramirez, who was firing punches in desperation. With a slight smile creasing his face, Whitaker casually ducked and slipped everything Ramirez could throw at him. At one point, he sat on the lowest strand of the ropes. Ramirez could still not hit him. Tiring of that, Whitaker arose and strolled away from his frustrated challenger, contemptuously turning his back on his beaten opponent.
If you haven't seen that, by the way, Whitaker sitting on the rope against Ramirez is absolutely just a joy to watch. Obviously annoyed by the champion's antics, Judge Sid Nathan gave the last round to Ramirez, but he gave the fight to Whitaker, 117 to 111. Later, someone asked Whitaker what he would have done if the judges had repeated that Paris robbery. He said, laughing, they never would have got out of the building. His hometown fans would have locked the doors. Those other guys got away from me in Paris. This time, I would have found them, he said. So, yeah, not happening. So the new unified lightweight champion ended 1989 with a stoppage win over Martin Galavan before being named the Fighter of the Year by the Ring magazine and the Boxing Writers Association of America. He also finished the year sitting in third place on the Ring magazine pound-for-pound list, behind Mike Tyson, who was identified as the number 1, and number 2, Julio Cesar Chavez. And speaking of Chavez, who after his first successful defence of the junior welterweight title in Caesar's Palace, then stopped undefeated Argentine Alberto Cortez on December the 16th, 1989 in Mexico City. That was his last warm-up fight before facing Pernell's friend, Olympic team member and stablemate, Meldrick Taylor. Now, this was his signature fight that we have gone through on our Legendary Knight's Tale previously. Do go back and have a listen. It's a great listen. It was controversial because Taylor was leading the fight on 2 of the judges' scorecards before the stoppage win with only 2 seconds remaining. And Chavez said, I always represent my country because I will always be honoured to be Mexican. In the last round of that fight with Meldrick Taylor, my corner told me to give everything to do it for Mexico. And that's when I realised that the whole country was counting on me. Not only was he thinking of his country, he was also thinking of his little brother Omar, who was actually killed by a young drunk driver 8 years earlier.
He confided this to his sister Perla. He told her that it was Omar who was in his head as he sat on the stool, exhausted and trailing on 2 judges' cards just before the last round against Meldrick Taylor. He told Perla, suddenly, I felt this incredible force come into me, this power. He rose and came at Taylor. With 25 seconds left in the fight, he buckled Taylor with an overhand right, then collapsed him 10 seconds later with another short right, convincing the referee, Richard Steele, to stop the fight with just 2 seconds left on the clock. His epic win over Taylor is considered the fight of the decade for the 1990s. Now, at the turn of the new decade, Whitaker made his first defence of the unified lightweight titles against the future world champion, Freddie Pendleton, at the Convention Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Whitaker showcased his skills once again as he continued to apply consistent pressure while not getting seriously caught in close quarters. When he did get caught, he was able to show that he had the chin to match his boxing skills, while his fatigued opponent became desperate and missed frequently. A clear points win was enough to retain his unified champion status and in turn add more dollars to his enlarging bank balance. Where Chavez continued to live in a modest neighbourhood and support his family, although with an endless list of beautiful cars, Pernell also provided for his family, and Lou Duva said, he was one of the most generous people I'd ever met. Pernell always took care of those close to him. With his first big purse, he spent that money on a new house for his mother. Priority number 1 was to make sure everybody in his family had a ticket to the fights.
And Lou continued, he said there was even a time when he was financially supporting his entire family. You'd try and tell him that he couldn't take care of all those people. You'd tell him that he couldn't worry about some random situation with his brother. Don't tell me anything about my brother, he'd yell, and you'd have to leave it alone. You could ask him to do anything and he'd do it. He was part of our family and will always be part of our family. When Donna got married, he came to her wedding. Every one of my birthday parties, he'd be there. It was more than just being close or friendly. In fact, he might be the only fighter we ever had who was truly like family. He still calls me from time to time just to say hello and bullshit. For all his faults, You just had to love the guy. Next up for Pernell was the Ghanaian-born African legend Azuma Nelson, who stepped up in weight from the super featherweight division on May 19, 1990 at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. And, well, Whitaker dominated another opponent, all 12 rounds of them, to win it by a unanimous decision. But the fight will be remembered for the final round when Whitaker lifted Nelson's legs with his right hand and tapped him on the head with his left. Referee Mills Lane was not amused and deducted a point from Whitaker. Pernell, as we keep saying, was a southpaw, known for his outstanding defensive skills and for being a strong counter-puncher, but not a particularly hard puncher or a knockout artist. Well, Puerto Rican Juan Navarro will probably tell you different, as Whitaker had the punching power to match his extremely elusive style in the ring. Nazario was quite simply put to sleep with a quite wonderful left hook that he walked into, to be fair, after 2 minutes and 59 seconds of the first round on August 11, 1990 in Las Vegas.
Nazario was making his first defence of the WBA title, but he lost it to Whitaker, who became the first undisputed lightweight champion since Roberto Duran, adding the WBA and lineal titles to the WBC and IBF and ring titles that he already held. In doing so, he moved up to second place in the Ring Magazine pound-for-pound list, just behind Julio Cesar Chavez. 1991 is arguably the most uneventful years for both Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Although both were active, the opposition were not on their levels, so we're going to round off both of their years briefly. Now, in his first defence of the undisputed titles against late replacement Anthony Jones, Whitaker picked up another unanimous decision and a $500,000 paycheck on February the 23rd, 1991. 5 months later, at the Scope Arena in Norfolk, in front of a full-capacity crowd of 7,000, Whitaker dropped undefeated Spaniard Paulie Diaz in the 7th round as he eased his way to a lopsided decision. In Sweet Pea's last fight at lightweight and biggest payday of $1 million, he took on number 1 ranked Jorge Paez on October the 5th, 1991. Now, in a messy affair where both fighters were deducted points by referee Mills Lane and Paez cut over both eyes, it was another comfortable unanimous decision for Whitaker. Now, moving to Chavez and his 1991. After unifying the titles, Chavez engaged in a busy series of title defences and non-title fights. It started on December the 8th, 1990 when he defeated the WBC mandatory challenger Kyung Duk An by 3rd round knockout. On March the 18th, 1991, he defeated WBC number 4 ranked fighter John Duplessis by 4th round stoppage, and 6 months later he won a 12-round unanimous decision over former champion Lonnie Smith. On April the 10th, 1992, he then scored a stoppage victory over number 1 ranked contender Angel Hernandez in the 5th round, and then later that year he defeated Frankie Mitchell by a 4th round stoppage.
Which leads us nicely onto Julio's biggest fight since Meldrick Taylor on September the 12th, 1992 against Hector Macho Camacho at the Thomas & Mack Center in Las Vegas. As we have mentioned in Camacho's Dark Side of Boxing episode, if you don't listen to that, go back and listen, it's tremendous. He was actually very lucky to have been at this fight after almost getting himself arrested on the Mexican border with a kilo of cocaine in the boot of his motor. And if you haven't heard that story, I suggest you go back and listen to it because it's a belter. But he did make it, and he was able to give his opinion also on the WBC super lightweight champion at the time, obviously Chavez. And he said, "Man, I can't explain Julio. I spent a few days with the guy in Culiacan. He's a gentleman. He's always smiling and drinking a beer. He's always got a lot of people around him, but you barely notice him. It was me carrying the show wherever we went. He's got to be crazy in some way to do what we do. You can't be in your right mind. I just don't know what kind of crazy he is." Well, Hector had to actually relinquish his WBO version in this division of the title to get the fight made, meaning that this was not a unification fight, which many felt it should have been. Chavez, now 30 at the time, had stopped 18 of his last 19 opponents since he won the title in May 1989. Comparatively, Hector had fought 8 times during the same period of time. 2 of those victories were controversial split decisions. To say this was a one-sided fight would be a complete understatement. Chavez dominated Hector, and Hector took his punishment. Chavez dished out a 12-round beating, but Camacho showed amazing determination to see the fight through while getting brutalized in the process. It was an absolute annihilation. If you haven't seen it, go back and look at it. This is not Camacho's best recommendation, but it is for Chavez, that's for sure. But 2 days after Chavez's demolition of Camacho, Rafael Herrera, who was Mexico's former world bantamweight champion, spoke as he stood amid several millions of people who had crowded the streets of Mexico City to receive their Mexican boxing hero.
Fame in his homeland had come to Chavez years earlier, but it was only now, after he had destroyed Camacho on the weekend when Mexico celebrated its independence and on the heels of the country's humiliating one-medal showing in the Summer Olympics, that he had truly become an idol. His reluctance to fight in Mexico City only once before he fought in 1989, had he risked it after being cheated by local judges there in his final amateur fight, and had limited his media exposure. But not now. Chavez said, "All of Mexico trusts me now. All of Mexico is depending on me. It's a big responsibility. I cannot fail them. All the money from my lesser fights I am giving to disaster victims, to hospitals, to orphans, to the elderly." Now, at this point, with Mike Tyson in prison, and with the pay-per-view broadcast of Chavez Camacho surprising everyone by attracting 750,000 customers, perhaps Chavez was finally on the threshold of an even larger acclaim. He said, "I know that I'm not Tyson, or Ali, or a Leonard, but I have beaten all of their records. I am satisfied with what God gives me. I do not have big endorsements. I understand that much of it is because I am Mexican, but I am happy that way. Don King did not promote me well. He was not fair to me. But now he loves me. I finally have him by the hairs. He does what I want." Now, moving back to Whitaker, who fought 4 times in 1992, where he began his climb towards the light welterweight title by testing the waters against Harold Brazier in Philadelphia and Jerry Smith in Mexico City. He outpointed Brazier in 10 and knocked out Smith in the first round on the undercard of the then current IBF junior welterweight champion Rafael Pineda.
And on July 18, 1992, Whitaker took on the Colombian Pineda in an attempt to become a 2-weight world champion in front of a modest crowd of just 4,000 at the Mirage Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Pineda was actually deducted a point in round 6 before Whitaker scored a knockdown in the 8th with a wonderful right hook to the body. Pineda rose from the canvas and landed a deliberate low blow right at the end of the round and was deducted a further point, but none of that mattered, as the slick Sweet Pea won by unanimous decision and the IBF title in his second weight class. Pernell never defended that title and did not want to stay around in his new division for long, so after a warm-up victory to end 1992, he decided to move into the glamour welterweight division. His sights were very firmly set on a showdown against the current pound-for-pound number 1, the only man sitting above him in the rankings, and that was Julio Cesar Chavez. However, there was still plenty for both fighters to do before they finally entered the ring to face one another. Now, by this point, Chavez had actually averaged 1 bout every 57 days over his pro career, 2 or 3 times the frequency of the other top fighters. He explained his 84-0 record to Sports Illustrated in an unusual way, saying, "I could not bear the thought of losing because it would hurt my family." Chavez had now won 5 titles in 3 weight divisions, the super featherweight, the lightweight and the super lightweight, and his next defence of the crown would be against Greg Haugen in Mexico City. Chavez would go on to hold the Guinness World Book of Records for the most fans at a boxing event with a total of £132,274 at the Aztec Stadium for his fight against Hagen on February the 20th, 1993.
He was ready to collect $2.5 million for the fight, but also, like Pernell, had his eyes fixed on the welterweight division. Yet, with all this publicity among his Mexican fans, and considered to be the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world, not everyone knew of him around the world, and Bobby Goodman said, "It's a puzzle to me. He's good-looking, intelligent, sensitive, bright-eyed, quick to smile, and such a tremendous fighter. But the average guy on the street still doesn't know who he is." Lou Duva said, "He never became what he should have." Lou explained, "He should have been taught English. He should have had much more PR. You don't fight for Mexico when you're as good as Chavez. You fight for the world. But you can only do that by speaking to people. Maybe he's done great things, but who the hell knows?" Now, Gary Smith explained in his Sports Illustrated article the reasons for Chavez being an unknown quantity outside of Mexico. He agreed with Lou Duva that, no doubt, his lack of renown outside Mexico is partly because Chavez does not speak English. He also blamed his promoter. He said, "It's also because of the promotional neglect of Don King, whose preoccupation with the heavyweight division and with Tyson often left Chavez languishing on undercards as Tyson's warm-up wrecking ball. And, yes, there was Chavez's lack of foil, no household names to dance to the edge of death with, no Ali's, Frazier's, no Leonard's, Duran, or Hearns." Bobby Goodman also agreed, "Sure, but a fighter this good?" And then he paused for the answer. Maybe his opponent, Greg Hagan, had the answer. Now, he was quoted before the fight in describing Chavez's opposition, stating, "All he's fought is Tijuana taxi drivers," and then insisted that there aren't 130,000 Mexicans who can afford tickets.
Deary me, not a thing to say to Chavez, who responded, "I really hate him bad. When he looks at me, I want to vomit. I'm going to give him the worst beating of his life. I'm going to make him swallow those words that came out of his dirty mouth." Well, the Washington-based fighter probably should have kept his mouth shut, because he was on the receiving end of a vicious beating. He was dropped in the opening seconds of the first round, but managed to fight on valiantly to his credit until he was knocked down again in the fifth. He got up, but he was stopped after receiving a further barrage of those vicious punches from Chavez. After the fight, Chavez commented to Hagan, "Now you know, I don't fight taxi drivers." And well, a bloodied Hagan, to his credit, responded, "They must have some tough taxi drivers." Well, on March 6th, 1993, Pernell Whitaker got his chance to win a third world title in a third weight class when he took on the WBC welterweight champion, James Buddy McGirt, who was making his third defense of the title. Now, Whitaker was guaranteed $1.25 million and McGirt $1 million in a fight that took place at Madison Square Garden in New York City in front of a crowd of just over 10,000. The United Press International reported on this and give us some other parts of this story that we're going to read out. So the article explained that the welterweight champ hardly hooked, trying instead to beat Whitaker with his right hand. The strategy worked in the fourth and fifth rounds when McGirt landed good shots to the head and body. But Whitaker, who was more active in the first three rounds, turned the fight back around in the sixth round with a two-handed flurries and hard left leads. The pattern of the fight changed in the seventh round to Whitaker's advantage. In the first six rounds, McGirt backed up and Whitaker chased.
But starting in the seventh, Whitaker retreated and let McGirt chase. Whitaker began catching McGirt walking in to his left leads and escaped before the champion could retaliate. Whitaker's corner told him to stay away in the final two rounds, and he did. McGirt came in on the 11th and 12th, landing some big right hands, but never inflicting any serious damage. A brief scuffle broke out after the bell between McGirt's trainer, Al Certo, and Whitaker's trainer, Lou Duva. Referee Larry Hazard shoved Duva back to his corner and restrained him. It was the toughest task of the night for Hazard, head of the New Jersey Boxing Commission, who refereed his first fight since 1985. There were no knockdowns, and neither boxer was ever in trouble. Whitaker, using his speed and capitalising on his opponent's sore left arm, captured a unanimous 12-round decision Saturday night to take the World Boxing Council welterweight title from Buddy McGirt. Whitaker summed up the fight by saying, "Easy. That's what I try to do, make them easy." McGirt, whose corner iced his left shoulder between rounds, said, "My arm went. What can I say?" The United Press International then explained, what Whitaker didn't know was he already had a fight set with Julio Cesar Chavez, win or lose. Whitaker's promoter, Dan Duva, and Chavez's promoter, Don King, worked out a deal earlier in the week calling for Whitaker to defend the WBC welterweight title against the Mexican Chavez if he won Saturday night. If Whitaker lost to McGirt, he would have fought Chavez in a 140-pound title unification bout instead. King is looking to stage the fight in San Antonio, Texas in September. Whitaker spoke after the fight about his next opponent in Chavez, and he said, "I was always preparing for Buddy McGirt. Chavez was not on my mind. We're going to get together. We'll see who's the best fighter pound for pound. It's going to be spectacular, entertaining."
So finally, the two finest pound-for-pound boxers in the world would settle the argument of who deserved the number one spot and who was the best. Whitaker, the reigning IBF junior welterweight champion, and now the new, because he still held that upper junior welterweight title, the WBC welterweight champion, would meet the WBC junior welterweight title holder in Julio Cesar Chavez. But first, the Mexican had to overcome one more opponent. So the New York Times magazine actually wrote a piece headlined "The Killer from Culiacan," which mentions Chavez's brutal and scintillating sixth-round knockout of Terence Alley on May 8, 1993 at the Thomas & Mack Center. Now, in that article, they explain how Chavez was still not getting the attention he deserves. The big fight coming up, that was the main sort of the angle they were looking at. And he said the champion's own promoter, Don King, doesn't seem to appreciate the mythic figure that he possesses in his stable of lugs. Consider, the easiest place to find the pound-for-pound best in recent years was on several Mike Tyson tickets, where Chavez consistently earned $1 million or $2 million per outing as a secondary attraction to the heavyweight champs' 10 or 12 million. In Chavez's last fight, a sixth-round TKO over the spunky but overmatched Terence Alley in Las Vegas on May 8, he received second billing to a dismal dance between two uninspiring heavyweights, Lennox Lewis and Tony Tucker. Usually, Chavez doesn't care how large his name appears on the posters, or so he says, but that slightly ticked him off. About 10 days before the fight, tickets weren't selling, and I told Don King, "There's something wrong, and if we don't fix it, I'm gone." That's what Chavez said. So they pushed my fight a bit more on the radio, and the ticket sales picked up a little. But by then, it was really too late. No one who enjoys boxing can say that Chavez doesn't put on a good show, but he is neither a show-off nor a showboat.
Chavez doesn't wear outrageous outfits into the ring like Hector Camacho, or talk trash at the pre-fight press conferences like Greg Hagan, to cite two recent rivals whom the Mexican pounded from headliner right back to undercard status. He is not cruel, just cold. One could simply say that Chavez treats his opponents the way the world treats most young men who eventually drift into the boxing ring. He limits their opportunities. "The man from Culiacan," says Boxing Illustrated's editor/publisher Bert Sugar, "cuts the ring off better than anyone I've seen in the last 20 years. Then Chavez halves the half ring and surgery begins." Now, while Chavez was still struggling to conquer beyond Mexico, his style was a lot more fan-friendly. Whitaker was the opposite, a more known fighter in America, but his southpaw style and array of dips and slips left his opponents baffled and outclassed, as well as unappreciated fans. Lou Duver explained that Pernell was one of those once-in-a-generation boxers. He could do anything in the ring. He was the best all-round fighter that we had. Not only did he teach me to be a better trainer, but he taught all the other fighters how to be a better boxers. My daughter Donna was like a lot of people. She didn't like his style. She thought he was boring in the ring. But everybody else, including the other boxers, loved Sweet Pea. Pernell was such a good defensive fighter that you never thought you'd get hit, and whenever he got hit, you thought he was going to go down. Slugging wasn't part of Pernell's game plan, but he could do it if it came to it. Making guys miss was as pleasurable to him as landing a knockout shot to other boxers.
And Lou Duva continued. He said there weren't too many fighters who could make Pernell do what they wanted him to do. He did what he wanted to do, making all these defensive moves while a guy would be trying to kill him. He could move from southpaw to right hand like it was nothing. What a beautiful boxer. There was a streak of 3 or 4 years where Pernell never lost a round. He was a great fighter. He never lost a round because his opponents couldn't hit him, and Pernell explained his God-given talent. He said, I don't care who I'm fighting. I don't care if it's God. If I don't want God to hit me, he's not going to hit me. So we're going to move into the build-up of this fight, and Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez was a difficult fight to put together because of their promotional and television alliances. As today, always comes up the problem. Whitaker, promoted by Main Events, had a long-standing relationship with HBO, while Chavez's recent fights had aired on Showtime, mostly because of his affiliation with promoter Don King. Now, in the end, after much debate, it was agreed that Whitaker-Chavez would be aired live on Showtime Entertainment Television, was called by blow-by-blow man Steve Albert and analyst Bobby Cruz and Dr. Ferdy Pacheco. Other disputes continued through the rules meeting, predominantly over the choices of judges, which briefly threatened to derail the fight. Chavez and his team was angered that an American judge was on the panel, Jack Woodruff, without a Mexican counterpart, so they said they would refuse to fight unless all 3 judges were from neutral countries. Whitaker and his team, headed by promoter Dan Duva, said they would pull out if any changes were made. And with that, none were made and the crisis was averted. While Whitaker's team prevailed on the makeup of the judging panel, Team Chavez were able to secure one important concession, and that was a catch weight of 145 pounds, 2 pounds under the official weight limit, yet the WBC welterweight title would still be the only title on the line.
This was a fight that was awash with historical significance. At 87-0 with 75 knockouts, Chavez had assembled the longest winning streak from the beginning of a career in the modern era, the 6th longest win streak at any point of a career. If he defeated Whitaker, Chavez would become Mexico's first 4-division ruler and only the 4th fighter ever to capture major belts in 4 weight classes. The other 3 were Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns and Roberto Duran. There was a genuine disliking from one fighter that wasn't reciprocated by the other, which made it a bit unusual. Chavez was not always known to be much of a trash talker, but was all of a sudden speaking out to the press before the fight. When someone mentioned Pernell Whitaker, Chavez was quoted as saying, "Ugh, I will vanquish this pathetic gringo for the glory of all Mexico." He had, of course, had a few beers by that point, so maybe it was the drink that was talking. He tried to explain why he found Pernell so disgusting. "The younger, faster fighter is just another dancer," said Chavez. "Whitaker makes me sick. He doesn't come to fight. I tried watching him on videotape, but I had to shut it off. It was turning my stomach. I don't want to talk about him anymore." Lou Duva did most of the talking for Whitaker during the build-up. He said, "Chavez is mortal, even predictable. He's a Sandy Sadler type of fighter, and Pernell is a Willie Pep, to name 2 historical figures. There's a precedent for this here bout, and after all this time, I do believe I've figured Chavez out." Now, we have actually done a legendary night on Willie Pep and Sandy Sadler, and we can assure you that Sadler actually got the better of Pep during their historical encounters, and some within the industry were actually full of praise for the Mexican, Angelo Dundee included, who said he was the toughest fighter I've ever seen, bar none.
Well, Bobby Goodman, that matchmaker for Madison Square Garden, pointed out that many fighters who take on Chavez have their careers dramatically reduced. Meldrick Taylor, Edwin Rosario, Roger Mayweather, Juan Laporte, they were never the same after Chavez. The fight was agreed to take place in San Antonio, Texas, and it was the state newspaper that reported just getting the fight to come to San Antonio took some doing. The then mayor, who was Nelson Wolff, was a key player in the negotiations, and he was roundly criticised for agreeing to negotiate what many considered a sweetheart deal that included charging only $10,000 to rent the dome and capping King's expenses to $90,000. In 1992, just a year before the big fight in the Aladome, King actually invoked the Fifth Amendment during a Senate investigation when questioned about his connection to mobster John Gotti. There were also numerous lawsuits alleging dishonest business practice. Now, away from this article, there is one other allegation that was made, actually. I think we might have sort of mentioned it on Don King's Dark Side of Boxing episode, and that was that the US government actually charged King with forging a contract with Julio Cesar Chavez to defraud Lloyd's Bank in London. Just to throw that in there, didn't get too much more detail on that, unfortunately, but it's apparently true. So, the San Antonio Express News continued, and they said, despite all of that, Wolff believed exposure from the hordes of media covering the event, along with hotel and restaurant revenue from the thousands in attendance, would make it a good investment and worth the risk. And Wolff actually recalled, everyone said we were crazy, but sometimes you dance with the devil to go for the pot of gold. Turns out he was right. Rudy Rodriguez possessed similar feelings. The then 40-year-old San Antonio businessman was tasked with putting together a group of investors to bring the show to Alamo City. Rodriguez said, I flew to New York with two of my business partners and we sat with Don King in his office for 3 pretty intense days. None of us had ever done anything like this before and never did again. We just saw it as a tremendous opportunity and it ended up making a several $million commitment.
King moved to San Antonio temporarily at the La Mansion del Rio Hotel to begin promoting the fight. He was joined by Fort Worth regional promoter Lester Bedford, who was hired to market the event in the Southwest. Bedford, who has worked hundreds of major sporting events over the years, including dozens of world title fights, said, I knew then it would be the best thing I'd ever be involved in. Well, I was right. During fight week, thousands attended a series of open workouts featuring the fighters at downtown hotels. The San Antonio Express News reported, the city was abuzz for weeks, thanks in large part to flamboyant promoter Don King, who agreed to bring the fight card to the Alamo City, only after some serious wooing by city officials. The Alamo Dome had just opened that spring, adding to the hoopla. Paul McCartney christened the facility in May, followed by the US Olympic Festival in July and August. The George Strait Country Music Festival on September the 5th continued a triumphant first year. But it was the fight that put a bow on it all, attracting around 2,000 media members from around the world and more than 20,000 fans from Mexico. When it was time for the state-required physical exam days prior to the mega fight set for September 10th, 1993, Chavez was nowhere to be seen. Television cameras then caught the Mexican champion not training, but enjoying the nightlife in Dallas. A day later, Chavez rolled into San Antonio in his stretch limo, accompanied by his hefty entourage, and bragging about his strength to anyone who would listen. Dr. Paul Sanez, longtime San Antonio Spurs team physician and the ringside physician for the fight, who administered the exam, recalled, he was brash, he was cocky. At the weigh-in, both appeared in great shape, as Pernell Whitaker scaled 145 and Chavez 142 pounds.
And at that weigh-in, Whitaker told the Associated Press, "This fight is for the title for best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. That is the title every man dreams of. This fight is the World Series, Super Bowl, NBA Finals. It's boxing's two best fighters." For the first time in more than 4 years, Chavez was thrust into the role of challenger. And it was a role that he relished. And he also told the press, "Now that I'm the challenger, I'm a lot hungrier than I have been. And a lot more thirstier by the sounds of it as well." Chavez told the AP through interpreter Gladys Rojas, "I'm going to demonstrate how a challenger should fight a champion when he wants to win a title." Whitaker then countered that and said that everybody thinks this will be the toughest fight of my life. It will be the easiest fight. He also swore not to mock the predominantly Mexican crowd by wearing a sombrero or any other stupid gimmicks, as some had reported he might do. He said, "I respect him too much," as in Chavez. "But the real reason I'll stick to business is that I respect myself and look out for my own well-being." Now, the odds were in Chavez's favour. They swung wildly, as one source quoted 9-5, while another cited 2-1. A rush of a lot of money on the Mexican pushed the line at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas to 3-1. Expert observers, however, knew the clash of styles and talents would result in a tough, close, and hard-to-score match, so many felt. The fight between Julio Cesar J.C. Chavez, 31, and Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, 29, was one of the most in-demand fights in boxing. At the time of their meeting, Chavez and Whitaker had been rated the world's best two fighters, pound for pound, as we've always said. But by the ring, for 3.5 years, they were 1 and 2. Finally getting it on. Chavez, the great pressure fighter, was ranked number 1, of course, and Whitaker, the slick southpaw, was ranked number 2, but I'm sure others had it different.
Whitaker spoke of the magnitude of his fight against Chavez, saying, "This is for the best fighter pound for pound. We may be fighting for my title, but that's not what everyone is talking about. This is like going for gold again." But there was another reason why Whitaker wanted to beat Chavez, and that was for revenge. Whitaker cried when he watched his friend Meldrick Taylor stopped with just 2 seconds to spare in his fight with Chavez 3 years earlier, so this was going to be payback. Whitaker made a promise in the week leading up to the fight. "I like to go on the road and take the hometown fans out of it." The New York Times run a piece on the day of the fight, which gives a great insight into the pre-fight feeling on the day among the fighters, the rival teams, the fans, and the press. And it read, "He can hide, he can run, he can spin, but at some point on Friday night, while most of the crowd of 60,000 will be booing his every move, Pernell Whitaker will have to fight, and that is what his opponent, the almost mythic Julio Cesar Chavez, does best." Thus, a classic boxing confrontation awaits one of history's largest indoor fight crowds and a pay-per-view audience that could find 1 million homes tuned in. The elusive, sneaky, infuriating Whitaker, possessor of a 32-1 record and the WBC's welterweight title, will defend that crown against Chavez. At the weigh-in last night, Whitaker angered Chavez. For Chavez, the Mexican with the 87-0 record who is moving up in weight from his super lightweight title, the anger at Whitaker's boast is palpable. Repeatedly, Chavez has said in Spanish, but not in so many words, that he possesses more courage than Whitaker. This bout has especially intrigued the experts.
It had, and the New York Times continued with their article. It said Emmanuel Stewart was so moved in discussing the fight over dinner that he leaped out of his chair. "See, if Whitaker can do this," and Stewart started to pummel the air with quick and short punches, pow, 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 "then get out, he's got a chance." But then, more soberly, Stewart sat down and suggested, "But he can't make a mistake. Chavez can make a mistake and still nail him, because we know Chavez can take a punch, but we don't know if Pernell can hurt him." This is why Chavez will earn $5 million on a championship triple header that will take in about $30 million, including a live gate of about $6 million. Terry Norris defends his WBC Super Welterweight crown against John Gatti, and Azuna Nelson, the Super Featherweight champion, fights Jesse James Leha. This was actually a 4-fight pay-per-view, of which 3 of the title bouts were aired, and the actual price was a reasonable $29.99. So back to the article, Chavez has knocked out 75 opponents, usually after boring in with that side-to-side head bob, the left finding its way to cause damage. Whitaker, who will take home between $2.5 million and $3 million, has knocked out less than half of his opponents, 15. But he is a left-hander. Chavez says he's fought 5 left-handers and went the distance with 4. The other was a technical knockout. That, interestingly, came against Jose Luis Ramirez in 1988, 7 months after Ramirez won a disputed decision over Whitaker, his only loss. If there is a disputed decision here, one that could anger the crowd, the Aladome has rehearsed for problems. This will be its first fight. Carol Darby, a general manager of the stadium, said, "We won't do metal detectors, but we will search bags." Chavez is still angry after having threatened to pull out Wednesday when he learned that the Texas Sanctioning Commission would not remove the one judge from the United States or add a Mexican judge.
The official in charge of boxing for the state, Ricky Valdez, reiterated today that the decision would stand. But Chavez's unhappiness, he says, he is fighting under protest, could stir the crowd. Cristobal Rosas, who is described as Chavez's official trainer, said Julio is not worried about the judge situation, but he is very bothered by it. Still, said Rojas, after the 4th or 5th round, the fight will be under Julio's control. All the talk may not matter if Chavez does what he does best, cut down, escape lanes with his wearing down style. His opponents gradually find that they have nowhere left to run. Whitaker, meanwhile, will attempt a clockwise dance with bursts of surprise moves, some of them intended to embarrass Chavez. The Mexican is prepared for Whitaker's ducking. He hopes the officials are too, and he said, "I want them to know it's illegal to crouch below the waist, and they should be aware of this if Whitaker tries it." Every fighter hurts his punching hand at some time, and rumours persist that Chavez continues to have problems with his right, specifically an arthritic knuckle injured some fights ago. Jose Daniel Castro, his conditioner and therapist, said he has had plenty of time to rest and the hand is 100%. Nelson Wolf said he worried right up to the opening bell about a Chavez loss, and he said, "If that happened, I was afraid we'd have a riot on our hands." The former mayor said his favourite story stemmed from an incident that occurred a couple of mornings before the fight when Wolf went jogging with Chavez at McAllister Park as part of the Champs Road work. He noted Chavez was sluggish and later told King he didn't think Chavez could win. Wolf recalled, "King told me, I can't tell you who's going to win, but I can tell you who isn't going to lose." And those words echoed in Wolf's ears right after the fight.
But they sure did. Emmanuel Stewart again said before the fight, these two guys who, for their entire careers, have made their opponents fight their fights. Something's got to give. The crowd arrived early for the fight. Many with painted faces chanting "Mexico, Mexico," and waving flags. It was a distinctly pro-Chavez crowd of a nearly 60,000 fans, or 59,995 to be exact, so they say, they vary, falling short of the indoor record held by Muhammad Ali-Leon Spinks rematch in New Orleans nearly 15 years earlier, which was 63,350. Steve Zito, the Alamo's general manager, who was director of operations and engineering, said years later, "It was a great experience, one of the highlights of my career. There was an incredible amount of hype for the event. It was an absolutely amazing night." The vast majority of the 75,000-seat Aladome Stadium was packed with passionate Chavez fans who triggered a righteous atmosphere as in Chavez entered the arena. Now, he walked towards the ring accompanied by a traditional mariachi band who tried in vain to compete with the thunderous noise generated by a sea of green and white and red as the partisan crowd welcomed their unbeaten idol to the ring. The cheers turned to a robust boos as Pernell Whitaker entered the arena to the sound of Naughty by Nature's hip-hop parade.
On March 6, 1836, the Alamo became the site for one of the most celebrated battles in American history. Now, more than 157 years later, the newly created Alamo Dome will become the site for one of the most celebrated battles in boxing history. It's five-time world champion Pernell Whitaker versus five-time world champion Julio Cesar Chavez.
So, into the fight we go. And I'll begin with round one. And Pernell Whitaker began the first standing his ground, which was a surprise by many, while Chavez, normally a slow starter, promised to come out of the blocks much faster, and he more than lived up to his promise. Fighting with urgency, Chavez came forward behind rights to the body in hope of draining Whitaker's legs and fatiguing him, whereas the champion fired sharp jabs and 1-2s while constantly pivoting. At the bell, the fans unleashed a roar, convinced that Chavez had earned an early lead. And for us, he did.
Chavez then opened the second by landing a lead right to the head, and after tasting a stabbing left from Whitaker through several punches in the clinches, a move that drew caution from referee Joe Cortez. Chavez began to hit the target with surprising regularity, while Whitaker lacked the power to discourage the challenger. Whitaker looked a little frustrated, so landed a low blow and then a second on the break, nearly forcing Cortez to deduct a point, but he opted to refrain. When the bell sounded, Chavez had swept his second straight right on the scorecards. The challenger had pressed the action in the first two rounds, while Whitaker backpedaled to his right and landed the occasional jab. Although Chavez had taken the first two rounds, he was already having difficulty solving Whitaker's elusive movement, and it was here that Lou Duva made an adjustment that would make it even harder for Chavez. He advised after the second round, "You're moving too fast, Pete. Slow down, double up on the jab, don't be afraid to throw that left hand, start letting him get a little closer, turn him, set the tempo." Whitaker came out more confident for the third, landing a crisper, sharper jab, nailing a pursuing Chavez with 3 stingers in a row. At once he settled into what he called his sleeping style, a kind of slippery, relaxed way of carrying himself around the ring that made it harder for Chavez to get to him. Whitaker had now found a way to impose his science into the fight. In less than a minute, Chavez's aggressiveness slowed, allowing Whitaker to exploit with 2 hard jabs to the face before spinning away. An excellent right hook to the head jolted Chavez's head, and a left cross to the face at the bell ended an excellent 3 minutes for the champion. And at this point, for us, we had it 2-1 to Chavez.
We did indeed, and moving into the 4th and 5th rounds, by the 4th round, Whitaker was in control of the fight as Chavez grew increasingly frustrated with his opponent's style. The pair then engaged in some dirty infighting to start the round, leading to both men actually getting warned about low blows. Whitaker felt he wasn't getting any help from the referee Joe Cortez, and he actually showed his frustration by slapping away the referee's hand as he tried to separate the fighters. Cortez took offence by this at Whitaker's disrespect, and when the champ placed both gloves on the sides of the official's head in apology, Cortez pushed his arms away and firmly ordered, "Don't be pushed to me." Chavez smacked Whitaker on the thigh as the champion sprung up from another one of his squats that he liked to do, which also prompted words from Cortez. So after that conflict, Whitaker continued to control the action, forcing Chavez to shove a glove in his rival's face just before the bell. Whitaker had just evened up the fight 2 apiece, in our opinion, and by many people's opinions. Lou Duva praised his fighter. Now you're boxing. Now you're boxing out there. That's what you have to do. That's all. And then George Benton added, continue to do what you're doing. Don't give him nothing. Keep that circling going for you. Keep that right jab working. When you get on the inside, I want to see them uppercuts working. They're doing a hell of a job. The jab is the one that's going to keep him in check. When you ain't doing nothing else, I want you to jab. Well, in the fifth, Chavez's corner began yelling at him to attack, and he charged back to score one of his best rounds of the bout. In one flurry, he actually landed 2 sharp right-hand leads, another left to the body, and a third right that had Whitaker for only a moment in the fight, looking doubtful in the middle of the ring. The only time, in fact. Whitaker weathered this storm, but all 3 judges awarded the round to Chavez, as we did and many others. We had it 3-2 Chavez after 5.
So moving into round 6 up to 9, and one of the more defining moments in this fight actually occurred midway through that 6th round when Whitaker accidentally caught Chavez with a shot below the belt. Joe Cortez allowed the champion to recover, but didn't penalise Whitaker for the illegal blow. The British judge, Mickey Vann, later confessed he took it upon himself to dock Whitaker a point. Dan Duva rightly lodged a protest with the Texas Department of Licensing and Authorities, condemning Vann's actions. But we will come to that a little bit later. Now, moments after the action resumed, Whitaker landed another blow to the hip, but once again, the champion escaped the point deduction. Chavez had nothing to counteract Whitaker's jab. He couldn't maintain a sustained attack to the body, and he began to appear confused. He lost the round, but in our view, the fight was even after 6. With emotions boiling over, the 7th was even more intense than the foul-filled 6th round. Chavez charged in recklessly and fired punches from all angles, while Whitaker shifted angles and sliced through his guard. A right-left snapped Chavez's head in the final minute, ending a lively round. The hot pace continued throughout the 8th as Chavez charged and Whitaker countered as the crowd fell ominously silent and the flags stopped fluttering. Whitaker was producing cleaner work, and the massive left to the jaw in the round's final minute only reconfirmed who was in control. George Benton told Whitaker, "Give me the same round. Keep turning him and keep giving him those combinations. Now, you've made a hell of a stand." Chavez did win the 9th, scoring several times with left hooks and right hands, although Whitaker was quick enough with his response to neutralise any edge that Chavez may have created for himself. Now, at this point, after that round, we've got Whitaker up 5-4.
So moving into rounds 9 and 10, and after that 9th round, which you explained there, Sean, Chavez's corner said through Pacheco, that's the kind of round we need. You can't stop fighting and let this guy off. The guy's tired now. Come on, we're going to win this. He's dead, he's shot his bolt. You took that one, give us this one. While a frantic Duva insisted that Whitaker adjust, he said, "Pete, where's that jab? Where's that left hook? And get that uppercut going as soon as you see him set." Chavez fired power shots from multiple angles in the 10th, while Whitaker popped him back with singular body shots and crisp counters that ripped through the guard once again. Yet another low blow found Chavez's protective cup, but since a few rounds had passed between violations, Whitaker was given a brief caution before the action resumed. But even if a point had been deducted, it would have been at worst an even round. Even if Chavez's corner were yelling, you first, or was he? Well, Whitaker appeared to be on his way to a win. But his strength trainer, a guy called Bob Waring, knew better. He was actually standing ringside. He watched as Jose Sullivan, the president of the WBC, collected the judges' scorecards at the end of each round. Waring was astonished. He said later, "I'm watching one fight and seeing something else on the scorecards." Incredibly, at the start of the 10th, Whitaker was behind 86-85 on the card of Judge Jack Waldruff, and even with Chavez at 86-86 on the cards of Franz Marti and Mickey Vann. Waring yelled over at Lou Duva, "Lou, we got to win 2 of the last 3 rounds to win the fight." Well, they were ever mindful of the judging situation. Duva and Benton began to urge Whitaker to not rest on his laurels. We had it 6-4 Whitaker after 10 rounds.
So moving into the final 2 rounds, George Benton told Pernell, "Don't let this guy steal these 2 rounds. I don't give a damn what happened. Don't let this guy steal these 2 rounds. Just keep your hands moving, keep your jab going, and when you get close, move your hands." The same message was being delivered to Chavez. He was told, "Don't let this guy win these last 2 rounds. You've got to go all out. We need these 2 rounds." Chavez came out fast, but Whitaker blunted his attack with sharp lefts. His blows were more precise and powerful. Whitaker appeared the fresher man as Chavez leaned against the ropes. By the round's closing moment, Chavez seemed to be underwater. A sharp left followed by a left uppercut which nailed Chavez with 18 seconds remaining, igniting a final burst by the Mexican that mostly found fresh air. Whitaker won the 11th easily, and Pacheco declared near the end of the round, "Well, that's another one in the bank for Whitaker, and it's starting to look like the end of a long trail for Chavez." By now, the crowd was nearly silent. While in the corner, Chavez was being given a final verbal push, and even one of his sons, 7-year-old Julio Jr., joined in the chorus. "Hit him, Daddy," he said, "hit him." A victory here would have qualified as an even bigger sporting miracle than the Taylor finish, because Whitaker was stronger, fresher, and smarter. Whitaker spent the early part of the round not running around but charging inside, bullying Chavez to the ropes. Whitaker, now seemingly ahead on the cards, went on the back foot, having taken an accidental thumb to the eye. He moved and backpedaled out of harm's way while a tired Chavez chased after him. Then a split second before the final bell, Whitaker landed one last left to the jaw. The final blow to what had been a tremendously dramatic and unexpectedly action-packed encounter.
Well, looking perplexed, blood seeping from his nose, and looking like a beaten man, Julio Cesar Chavez raised his arms in more of a wishful gesture than anything else. Whitaker, sure he had just secured a career-defining triumph, climbed the ropes and celebrated while being showered with boos. The punch stats compiled by CompuBox for the United Press International showed Whitaker outlanded Chavez 311 to 220. But the distribution of the connected punches may lend credence to what was about to unfold. So while Whitaker led 130 to 38 in landed jabs, Chavez earned 182 to 181. So 1 punch more he edged out in connected power punches. Most fight observers revealed scores of 8 rounds to 4 for Whitaker. Others had it a bit wider, 9 rounds to 3. Me and you, Sean, we had it scored 8 to 4, so 116, 112 for Pernell Whitaker. And the reason why we're doing this is because, well, we don't normally do this, Sean, but we thought we'd do it because of this, the controversy that surrounds this fight. That Whitaker had basically put one of the most dazzling ring performances in recent years. He absolutely nullified everything Chavez had, especially towards the second half of that fight. He sat in the corner, head between his knees in exhaustion, when someone in his corner told him something that made him snap out of his temporary daze and look up in disbelief, saying, "What?" he asked, with a shock on his face. "I know they didn't rob me." Well, not long after that scene in the corner, ring announcer Jimmy Lennon Jr. announced to the world the news that had so aggrieved Whitaker in the camera shot they showed with him. And Woodruff, the judge who had drawn the anger of the Chavez's camp, being one of the judge, actually voted it 115, 113 for Pernell Whitaker. But he was overruled by England's Mickey Vann and Switzerland's Franz Marti, who both of whom scored the fight unbelievably 115 a draw. Well, boos from pockets of the audience rang around the stadium. Sports Illustrated wrote, "A judgment so violently in contempt of plausibility that even a number of Chavez's partisans in the largely Mexican-American crowd of 65,000 appeared embarrassed as they quietly left the arena. Yes, Whitaker kept his championship title, but he was denied the historic significance of officially inflicting the first loss of Julio Cesar Chavez's career.
Expressions of outrage from his camp were immediate. "The rat bastards," said Lou Duva as he pushed for the exit. "I told you we were going to whip him. Then they stole the fight from us." The pro-Chavez crowd was muted for large chunks of the fight, but it wasn't enough. Whitaker countered Chavez with everything he had in his arsenal of punches. The Mexican was left confused and desperate for large portions of the fight, and there was absolutely no question that Sweet Pea dominated the fight and deserved the win. Whitaker's verdict was accurate when he said, "I whipped his ass." Chavez's reaction, unsavoury. The cursory embrace of respect following 12 hard-fought rounds was non-existent. The Mexican did little to cover himself in glory by declaring he had no respect for the former Olympian. He also complained about Whitaker's tactics, which admittedly were on the cusp of illegal at times. Chavez later threw down the usual challenge of a fighter with something to prove, announcing he'd fight Whitaker again by saying anytime, anywhere. The cover of the January 1994 issue of KO captured the sentiment of most observers when it wrote, "Whitaker shafted. Outrage at the Alamodome. Only the judges were quick to the draw." Even worse, this verdict could have been avoided. Mickey Vann revealed during an interview with the London Star newspaper that I deducted a point from Whitaker for an appallingly low blow in the 6th round. As we know, a judge doesn't actually have the power to subtract points, and that action by Mickey Vann had a direct bearing on the final result. For Whitaker, he would have walked out of the ring with a majority decision victory. A distraught Whitaker refused to give a post-fight interview in the ring, but several minutes later, he offered comments to Showtime Entertainment television reporter Montel Williams.
Pernell said, "That's why I'm glad we got TV and we got millions of viewers watching this one so the public can really decide it. It's a win for me because the public gets to decide. You take a poll on your next show and you'll see the ones who say he won and the ones who say who lost. I'm going to enjoy this one because the people know who the winner is. I feel like Evander Holyfield did in the Olympics. This was an Olympics victory for us. I feel like Evander did, getting ripped off for the gold, like I got ripped off for this gold. But we'll come back. We'll get it back." Chavez actually said through an interpreter, "I'm not satisfied with the decision. Whitaker is a very difficult fighter. It wasn't one of my greatest nights. I tried my best to force the fight and I believe I won the fight. He surprised me several times, but he was doing a lot of things. He was hitting me with low blows occasionally and very intentionally. Whitaker didn't present a very strong fight to me and I want a rematch." So did promoter Don King, who made a possible rematch the main theme of his remarks at the post-fight press conference. Team Whitaker was agreeable but with conditions, and Shelley Finkel said, "If there is a rematch, it will be on our terms, what we want." And Pernell said, "This time don't make the negotiations hard, just make the fight." Of course there would be no rematch. The cover of the Sports Illustrated days later included a photo of Whitaker landing a punch underneath the headline, "Robbed." Boxing Illustrated captured another photo of the bout on its next cover with, "If you think the fight was a draw, don't buy this issue."
On the morning after the fight, Pernell waved at everyone beyond the balcony from his hotel room and said, "I want to tell the world that I beat the unbeatable. From now on, they're all going to look at me and say, there's the guy who beat Julio Cesar Chavez. He has been beaten. Pernell Whitaker beat him up. I'm not a tormentor, but I whipped his ass last night. And easily. I mentally and physically beat him. I put an old-fashioned project beating on him. A housing authority beating. A ghetto beating. Everyone tried to build him up, but I condemned the building. Pound for pound, Pernell Whitaker is the best fighter in the world. I'm not just a runner. I can fight. Give me credit. Give me the respect I deserve. Give me this one." Chavez said quietly, laughing, the morning after the fight and after a night of partying. He reflected, "I feel a little bit beat up. It was a difficult fight. Unfortunately, I couldn't do anything better. I still think that I forced the fight. I kept going forward. There was something I kept doing wrong. Marty and Van disagreed. They scored 6 of the 12 rounds differently, but they both came out with even scores of 115-115, ending the fight as a majority draw decision. The morning after, Van was quoted as saying, "I don't think there was an outcry. Some people thought one guy won, some people thought the other did. Who's right? We're right. I got it right, and that's it." Asked what he saw that others might not have saw, Van said, "Attack. That's what Chavez did. Attack." And according to Judge Marty, who said he saw Chavez dominating the fight and was rightly criticised by the media, he responded with this: "Not everybody knows how to score a professional fight." And of course, in our opinion, we make that right. He certainly had no clue. Neither did he or Mickey Van on this particular night.
On a more humorous side, the next week, as Lou Duva walked down New York's Broadway, a beggar with sunglasses and a tin cup wearing a blind sign told him, "Lou, anyone could see that Whitaker won that fight," which is brilliant. Love that. I'm sure it didn't happen. He's just making it up, but fantastic little tale from Lou himself. The controversy did not stop with just terrible judging. More allegations and conspiracies showed its ugly head. The heated negotiations before the fight actually came to fruition. It was reported that Texas officials assembled a pool of 5 judges who had worked fights for the WBC before for Dan Duva and Don King to pick from. A reasonable request, some may think. Well, hardly, said Dan Duva. It was clear to me that the 5 were not among the best in the world. Early on, I had suggested getting Jerry Roth of Nevada, the guy who was at the time recognised as the best. But the Chavez camp did not want Roth. My opinion is that he was turned down because he had Meldrick Taylor ahead when Taylor fought Chavez, obviously, in that famous night. Duva also said that a number of WBC officials approached him after the fight saying, "What are you complaining about? This is the perfect result. Everyone wins. That's just sickening." On the day of the fight, everyone who knows me knows that I had one fear, that Pernell would get robbed, that those people, for their own political interests, would deny him his victory. Well, the event overall for San Antonio was a huge success. Nelson Wolff and Rudy Rodriguez have nothing but praise for the way that Don King handled himself. Rodriguez actually said that he stood by every commitment we made with each other. And the San Antonio Express wrote that the attendance figures have always been elusive, but most recent media reports say that 58,891 fans attended the fight card. Many who actually witnessed the crowd pegged the attendance north of 60,000 or even 70,000. Wolf said the dome was configured for 73,682 that night. No one who was there reportedly saw any empty seats.
San Antonio News Express continued and said, even at 58,891, the figure was considered the record for a Texas boxing event until 2021, when Canelo Alvarez's TKO victory over Billy Joe Saunders at the AT&T Stadium in Arlington drew 73,126 spectators. Fan-friendly prices helped sell the Alamodome card. Upper deck tickets ranged from $10 to $35. Ringside seats topped out at $1,000. Moretti recalled the warm reception Whitaker received from patrons at BTR Cafe y Pandaria after the bout, and Moretti said everyone in that restaurant started clapping when he walked in. They showed him a lot of respect and the acknowledgement that he had won the fight. San Antonio was the real winner on September the 10th, 1993. The fight blacked out within a 100-mile radius of the city, but replayed the next night. It was seen by 1.2 million viewers on pay-per-view and generated a $6 million live gate. Estimates on its economic impact for the city surpassed $50 million. Some say it was as high as $90 million. Now, from this point in 1993, the Ring magazine ranked Pernell Whitaker as the best active boxer in the world pound for pound for the next 3 years. Whitaker now topped a list of his era that included James Toney, Roy Jones Jr., Evander Holyfield, Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad, to name but a few. Now 3 fights later, in January 1994, Chavez was actually finally beaten for the first time in his career after 89 fights against Frankie Randall by a stirring split decision, and when he officially retired 11 and a half years later, his record read 107 wins, 85 by knockout, 6 draws and 2 no contests. Chavez admitted to falling victim to drugs and alcohol, and he said, "I just couldn't prepare the same way. I lost my love of boxing, love for anything. I didn't take things seriously. It was very hard to leave my addiction. Nothing really mattered to me."
Yeah, Chavez said he was in a good financial shape from the millions he won in the ring, and he invested it in land, gas stations and many properties. "I left my family well off financially and left my kids a fortune for the rest of their lives, and they do not need boxing to be well off. They jump into the ring because they love the sport," of course referring to Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who did obviously go to pro boxing. Well, as for Pernell Whitaker, he maintained top spot in the Ring magazine's pound for pound rankings, where he would stay until May 1996, when Roy Jones Jr. assumed the throne. Losses to Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad ended his career on a low, but he truly was a terrifically talented fighter that does get overlooked very often. He ended his boxing career with a record of 40 wins, 17 KOs and 4 losses, and a single draw. Yep, of course, that draw. As with Chavez, Pernell had problems, as we've mentioned, with drink and drugs, but he managed to hide his a lot better than Chavez, and because it just didn't affect his performances. It did less than what it did sort of Chavez. And Lou Duva was obviously very close to him at the time, and he gave a little bit of an explanation in his book, and we thought we'll not end it with this, but just to round off those rumours that circulated. So Lou Duva said, "When we would get to camp, the drinking would lighten up. The hardest thing after a break was just getting him to camp. Tommy Brooks and I would be chasing him around, and once he got there, would be chasing him to make sure he'd show up each day to do the work. He was always a guy who had his own way of doing things, and it didn't catch up with him until the end. No matter what he did outside the ring, the drinking, the drugs, he was always in good shape and always made weight for his fights. It was a case of doing the bare minimum to get by. He was hard-headed, always in denial. As far as we know, he never went to rehab."
Lou continued and said, "I think he got locked up and there was a court-ordered rehab, but I don't know if he ever went or finished it. The drugs and alcohol definitely cut his career short. Pernell could have been going as long as Evander Holyfield if he'd have taken care of himself. He's not one of those small guys who had a weight problem or took a lot of beatings. It was just his lifestyle. Pernell played his own game. He knew when he wanted to turn it on and turn it off." Well, on July the 14th, 2019, Pernell was crossing the street in Virginia Beach at the intersection of Northampton Boulevard and Baker Road when he was struck and killed by a car. He was aged 55 years old. Now, we don't want to finish it on that sad note, so we are going to end it with a quote from Whitaker on how he enjoyed dissecting his opponents, just like he dissected Julio Cesar Chavez in San Antonio. He told Sports Illustrated, "Most fighters don't even know what's happened to them. I've taken something from them. Their confidence, their fight plan. They can't hit you. The fight is yours. They get self-conscious about punching. After a while, they start reaching, just hoping they're going to hit me. I don't care who I'm fighting. I don't care if he's God. If I don't want God to hit me, he's not going to hit me." And that brings an end to the tale of Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. Of course, we'll have a few moments to speak about the decision and our personal thoughts on it, which we have given previously in Pernell's career profile, but for the benefit of people listening to us for the first time in this tale, we honestly didn't think that it was a draw. And no matter how many times we go back and watch this fight, we always see Pernell Whitaker winning this fight. And it was one of those moments in time that it robbed Pernell Whitaker of a significant moment in his career. It is still a significant moment as part of his career, but it's not the positive one that it should have been. He should have been the one to inflict that first defeat on Julio Cesar Chavez. And unfortunately, that doesn't go down in history that way. The fight itself was brilliant, really, in comparison to what you've heard us describe in this episode. If you watch Pernell's career, he is the sweet science. He is the epitome of it. People like Floyd Mayweather Jr. based themselves off people like Pernell Whitaker, of course. So when you look at Pernell as a fighter, if you enjoy the sweet art of boxing, he is certainly a fighter to watch. But this particular fight, it wasn't just about the sweet art and the elusiveness. He stood there at times with Julio Cesar Chavez. He controlled the fight for large parts of it. So it was unbelievable, again, looking back in time, that this was scored a draw. One of the most notable moments, of course, is the English judge, Mickey Vann, who was a referee of ours as well in the UK. And the fact that he went and actually deducted a point for a low blow that wasn't called by the referee is really what messed the whole thing up, despite the fact that the other judge, Marty, really, I don't know what he was watching. But ultimately, that Mickey Vann moment really did cost Pernell Whitaker that deserved decision.
I absolutely did. I mean, I don't even know what to say. Had it even sort of got to that stage where it was even that close? I mean, I watched it again since, because obviously doing this episode, I just wanted to go back and just have a look myself and look. It's so obvious he's won this fight. There's just, apart from the first two rounds where Chavez comes out and he does cause Whitaker some problems. Other than that, Whitaker composes himself, gets back in track, pulls it even, and then even Chavez comes back in that fifth, and then that's it really. Because we're probably being nice, and that was me watching the other night, and I was being nice by giving Chavez the 4 rounds because he didn't deserve it really. The 9-3 is probably about right, but you give him the extra round just on the fact that he's giving it a go. And it is that the one thing we've tried to bang the drum on in this episode was the difference with what the fans like to see. Chavez, I mean, you see it in a great description from the New York Times. The person who wrote that clearly favoured Chavez and his style compared to what, at times just sort of mugging off Whitaker's style. And as you say, Sean, the one thing with Whitaker is I could understand with people getting a bit, not actually seeing the science of what a great boxer he was and just seeing him as a runner. He wasn't a runner. There were times when he obviously would backpedal, but most of the time he was good enough to evade a shot and land something. And he's always in position to inflict punishment himself, which is something that, people may say Mayweather does. And as you rightly say, Sean, Whitaker was the first. It was George Benton, actually, that passed on the knowledge to Whitaker. And then from there, Mayweather's moulding himself on this style. But even then, he didn't have the style, really. He tried the shoulder roll, and he's a master at the shoulder roll, but he didn't do much apart from throw a few shots. You can see with Whitaker's always throwing punches, always popping off the jab, always active, always elusive. And that's what he does with Chavez. And it is so frustrating, really, when you watch it. You know what's coming, and you're like, you want Whitaker to be the first to inflict that first defeat on Chavez. And it's a shame, it really is. And Mickey Vann, I mean, what on earth? He should be ashamed of himself. All right, you don't just deduct a point because you see fit. If the referee doesn't do it, the referee doesn't do it. You just got to just accept it. He should have won the fight. There's just no way about it. And it makes it a legendary night because everything, the build-up to it, the two best in the world at that time in 1993, for the last 3 years, from 1990 all the way up to 1993, they were the best two fighters, really. And it was, it just shows you, fighting on their peaks as well. Maybe it could have been a little bit earlier, maybe in between, say about 92, 91, they could have fought. But you can't argue with the timing of the fight even. So, shame they didn't have the rematch, Sean, isn't it?
The rematch should have happened, and that's the travesty of the thing, really, is that if this would have happened again, would it have been even more decisive? They couldn't have took it from him for a second time, surely, because a year later he loses, doesn't he? He loses his undefeated record, of course. And to me, I think it was a moment in time which will always be synonymous as part of Pernell Whitaker's career. And no matter how many people study Pernell, look at his fights, look at his history, I think a lot of us are uniform in our decision that he won that fight with Chavez. And I'd love to hear the opinions of those that thought Chavez actually won that fight, because break it down. Tell me how they won the fight, because ultimately, no matter how many times you watch that fight, take any emotion out of it, any patriotism out of it, and honestly, all you see is one fighter just outclassing another. And that's it. It's as simple as that. And it's just a shame that Pernell Whitaker was never really given the plaudits. He was in the general public, and I'm sure that probably satisfied him in some way, as he said in the quote that we read out. He knew that the public knew that he won that fight, and suppose that's all that mattered to him. It could have been worse. He could have lost his title, I suppose. He could have been, like the Jose Carlos Ramirez fight, where it was another really bad decision that went against him. And we did cover this in his career profile, how he just seemed to be plagued by certain decisions throughout his career, and they were quite synonymous with Pernell Whitaker. And again, it's like you've said, Johnston, it is what you like when you watch a fight, what you like when you score a fight. And like that judge at the end said, Marty says, only a professional judge knows how to score a fight. Well, the quality of these professional judges in this day and age in particular are there to be questioned 100%. But overall, it's been a great tale. It's a tale of two fighters from different necks of the woods, different nationalities, different upbringings, who came together on a collision course, who was achieving brilliant things within this sport and are both absolute legends in this sport. They came on that collision course where one fighter completely dominated the other, and we just never got the ultimate moment for that particular fighter in Pernell Whitaker. But as a tale, building that fight up and going through the previous fights of both of them, you can see kind of the difficulties and adversity that they both faced at times, and where one fighter was maybe favoured over another, and how Chavez wasn't promoted as highly as what he should have been at that time of his career. And I think Chavez is one of those fighters as well who over time has become more appreciated, whereas at the time when he was live and he was active and he was a fantastic fighter, he wasn't appreciated because of poor mismanagement and promotion, because of Don King, of course, and being on the Tyson gravy train at the time. So I feel for him as well, going back through this tale, that I think Chavez was maybe underappreciated for the time as well, and it's only post-retirement that really people have understood how much of a legend he was.
And I agree with that, absolutely. And, we tried to be, I suppose with the fight, you look at a fight, you do always sort of, you favour the Pernell side of the story, but I think we brought in both sides there, and a little bit about Julio Cesar Chavez that we'd never really spoke about before, even when we done the Meldrick Taylor legendary night. There was stuff we didn't necessarily go through with that we done in this town. There's a career profile there for Julio Cesar, and as you say, I don't think he was really appreciated until then. I think, he was out partying. He looked at Whitaker as just another mover that he's going to get rid of. He didn't really respect Pernell Whitaker in the way he should have done. I'm not sure if he would have been able to readjust himself outside the ring to have been able to take that rematch and then effectively manage to beat him like he had done his other opponents. It's a shame they just didn't get that rematch, because I honestly believe that after the first fight, there would have been more hunger from Chavez to maybe show a little bit more dedication in camp, maybe lay off the beer. And then I think then it would have been a closer fight, because 6 rounds, it was a tight fight. Just Whitaker just come through the home stretch. So it's really outstanding. And the one thing I say as well, if you are thinking that Chavez won this fight, all you got to do is listen to that crowd. How many 60,000 in there? When that bell rings, all you hear is nothing.
And that brings an end to the tale of Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez. If you have enjoyed this Legendary Nights episode, please do let us know by tweeting us at Legend Night Pod or at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter, or you can find us on Facebook at the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. You can leave comments on any of the video clips, audio clips that we put out there for this episode. If you are on Spotify listening, please drop a comment in the box below about what you thought about this episode. Have you seen the fight? Did you think that Pernell Whitaker should have got the decision, or do you think Chavez should have got the decision, or was a draw the right decision? Do let us know. If you are listening to this via YouTube, again, leave a comment below in the box about what you thought of the episode and what you thought of the fight and the outcome of the fight. And thank you, as always, to those that have subscribed to us through patreon.com. We hope you've enjoyed early access to this episode and ad-free access to this episode. If you are not a patron and want to see what else we can offer, please visit patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. And that is the end of this episode of Legendary Nights. You've been listening to the tale of Pernell Whitaker and Julio Cesar Chavez on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network.